Hey guys, how's it going? It's Danconia and welcome back to Overwatch. And this is a very random video idea, but welcome to Do You Remember? So, this is going to be a list of 5 things that you may or may not remember from the very early days of Overwatch. And let's say things back then were just as messed up as they are now. So, we can look at all sorts of things, UI differences, differences in heroes, before their reworks maybe, differences in balance, or even different metas that really, when you look back at the time that they were being used, and you look at how they worked, you think, damn, they were really OP. They were really quite something. How did that ever get in the game? But this is Blizzard, and they were eventually patched out, and we will never see some of this again. So, it's time to take a route down memory lane and see what Overwatch was like back in 2016 and even earlier. 5 things that you may or may not remember from the early days of Overwatch. Let's go. When you could pick multiple of the same hero. Now, you may be saying, well, you can still do that. You can still do that. And you can, but you can only do it in one mode. In the arcade. You used to be able to pick as many of the same hero as you wanted in competitive, in quick play, in whatever mode you wanted in Overwatch. It was seen in pro games as well, or pro games at the time anyway, very different to what it is nowadays. Imagine if you had Overwatch League teams that would be able to pick 2 Chasers, 2 Winstons and 2 Lucios as their 6-man team. That would be insane, but also pretty OP, maybe? Now, we remember seeing Envious running 2 or 3 McCrees at the same time. This was some crazy times in Overwatch. There was a meta where we did see 2 Lucios, 2 Winstons, and 2 Tracers. Highly mobile heroes, but then having the same of those heroes, that's like dive on steroids. It's crazy to think that that was something that was in the game. Just when you think about it, 3 years ago, 2016 was when there were no limits to the amount of heroes you could have. And man, crazy times. And just imagine if this was, say, patched back into the game now, there would be uproar in the whole community. They'd be like, what are you doing, Blizzard? This is OP. You can't allow this to happen. And it was the first major meta shift. It was the first thing to... I mean, recently we've had roll queue, which has, caused a massive meta shift. This was the first of these sorts of Blizzard implemented something that caused a meta to just be unplayable in the rules of the game. Crazy times. But do you remember when there were no limits to the amount of the same hero you could have in competitive and quick play? The original look of Overwatch eSports. Now, this is a long time ago, and we're talking going all the way back to 2015, the closed beta, I believe, when we first saw some Overwatch tournaments taking place. Of course, they had to have casters, and they had to have some sort of UI, but it looked very different to what we saw when we had Apex, but then also what we saw in the Overwatch League and what we've got nowadays. And there was a lot less to work with, especially for the commentators. So, a lot has changed since 2015. But, they had nothing. They had no ult tracking. They didn't know whose ultimate would come online until it came online. They had... Commentators and casters had to track ultimates. They had to track ultimates for the people playing, because otherwise they wouldn't know when they were coming up, because they didn't have the information and statistics that the UI gave them later on, once Overwatch was released. So, obviously, as you can see in the background, they just had F1 through to F12 for the view of player they wanted to look at. They had the hero they were playing, obviously with the very old coloured icons, which was... I still like those icons. Dude. I really like those icons. And they didn't have the top UI, which gave them the ult percentage and all that. And nowadays, we even know what's going on with the hero, whether they've been stunned or bubbled or frozen and stuff like that. None of that existed back then. So, it was very difficult to be a caster back then. You had to have really good game knowledge, so hats off to the guys that did it back then. And, man, doesn't it look different? But do you remember these tournaments when Overwatch eSports looked like this? When Bastion had 325 HP and had a 1000 HP barrier when he was in Sentry form. Oh boy. This didn't stay in the game for very long. Now, to remember this, you have to go all the way back to the closed beta in 2015. But originally, Bastion had 200 bullets when he was in Sentry form. He had 325 HP, which included armor and shields. But also, when he turned into his Sentry form, he was able to produce a 1000 HP barrier. Now, let's put this in perspective a minute, right? 1000 HP barrier in front of Bastion. That is actually more than the HP of Orissa's barrier on the PTR right now. And it's actually more than the HP of Sigma's barrier on the PTR right now after the barrier nerfs. Bastion had this back in the closed beta in 2015. Yeah, I'm not surprised it didn't stick around. It didn't even make it to the open beta, I don't believe. But man, oh man, imagine if this was a thing in 2019. Imagine the Bastion meta, because boy oh boy, we definitely would be in a Bastion meta. Although, the question is, would you want 1000 HP barrier on Bastion? Because he could have literally barriered himself and you could have literally forsaken a tank just because he had that barrier. That's how crazy that is. And Bastion was OP, and clearly it got patched very, very quickly. But do you remember when Bastion had 1000 HP barrier when he was in Sentry form? Oh, interesting times. The original Symetra. Symetra is a hero that has caused Blizzard and the Overwatch dev team a lot of troubles over the past 4 years. And she's had a lot of iterations, as I'm sure you'll all know. Now, I'm not talking about the Symetra that we currently play right now, who doesn't have a lock-on beam, who doesn't have a projected barrier. I'm not talking about the Symetra that had the projected barrier that she could project and would move in front of her. I'm not talking about the lock-on Symetra. Or, I'm talking about the Symetra that had the individual barriers that you could place on people. So, if you think of Brigitte's armor packs, much like that, but it's a shield instead. So Symetra could press E on when she was looking at one of the heroes on her team, and she could give them a certain amount of shield. And this Symetra wasn't around for all that long before she got reworked to her second state, where she got 2 ultimates, the teleporter and the shield generator. The shield generator replaced this E ability, and then the E ability became that projected photon barrier that a lot of people will probably know, the Symetra 2.0 if you want to call her. But Symetra 1.0, her ultimate was her teleporter, and then she had 3 turrets. Funny how those swings and roundabouts came back, wasn't it? And then she had this E ability which she was able to project onto heroes on her team. It was a long time ago, and I'm talking about beta times here as well, but interesting. And I actually think this Symetra, and hey, I didn't play it, but I actually think this Symetra was better than Symetra 2.0. Now, Symetra 3.0, in my opinion, is better than all of these Symetras. But imagine if this Symetra was in the game now. Interesting, wouldn't it? Imagine if we had Symetra's lock-on beam back. Oh, imagine the uproar. Do you remember when Symetra had personal projected barriers? When Beyblade was meta. Now, if you don't remember when Beyblade was meta, and you don't know what Beyblade meta was Reaper being nano boosted by Anna just after Anna's release in 2016, and sometimes she would also be speed boosted by a Lucio. So, originally, Anna's nano boost gave a speed increase, and as you might remember Beyblade, you used to whip it out and it would used to fly off and spin. Obviously, you know what Reaper does when he ults. He spins, right? And she gave him the nano boost, which increased his damage, made him less killable and more durable, made him faster, and then you put a Lucio speed boost with it, and Reaper becomes nigh on unstoppable. We saw team wipes with these ultimate combos. It was crazy. And when you look back at footage of it now, you were like, damn, how did that get in the game? That's OP. That is crazy. And in all fairness, Ana's Nano Boost now is still a pretty good ultimate when used in the right situations, even without the increase in movement speed, which was removed on November the 15th. Because, yeah, it was really powerful. And it was the first big nerf for a hero that had been introduced into the game, because obviously Ana was the first hero to be introduced after Overwatch's launch. And when you think going back the years now, there's been a few heroes that have had to have fairly quick balance updates because they've been pretty powerful. Ana, she came in a good state, but the increase in movement speed did cause a whole meta to develop, and man, it was crazy. But do you remember when the Reaper Ana Beyblade was meta? So that will do it for Do You Remember 5 things that used to happen in the early days of Overwatch, whether that was just after Ana's release in 2016, or mid-2016 I should say, or even back in the days of the beta. Now, there are other things I could have included on the list, and so if you want to see a part 2 to Do You Remember, then please like and subscribe and let me know in the comments down below, share it and all that stuff, hit the bell and all that, because if you want a part 2 to this, I will do it, because there are other things that I could have brought up. There have been map changes in Overwatch. There have been several different hero reworks that we could look back on, and different metas that we can reminisce about in a future video if you want to see it. But for now, thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you'd like to give it a like, subscribe if you're new, and I will see you in the next video. See you then.